And there is a side.
I know, it's a very challenging thing to engage with these questions and then suddenly pull out of them and engage with something fresh. But we're probably being quite ambitious and having 3 inputs this evening and then talking about we've kind of, this is the kind of model we're going. So it's a lot of input, but also hopefully a lot of stimulation for you to take away in terms of further conversations as well. So I'm going to just introduce the next input, which is from Paul Leonart. Paul is an overseas worker, and so his face is slightly obscured in this. So, and none of this needs to go on the internet anywhere. That's very important from a copyright perspective, but also from Paul's image perspective. So he's actually in Hong Kong at the moment, so that's why we asked him to record his input on this, because we so value what he shares on this subject. So let me welcome Paul all the way from Hong Kong. So he's going to share on some of the background cultural influences and how we got to where we are.
Volume.
Turn it off.
Rewind.
Oh, no, hang on a minute. It's disconnected from my. Yeah. Stop that again.
It's not just our Western worldview and civilization that, with various philosophers and influential thinkers, other worldviews have also been developing, such as Far Eastern culture, influenced by a Confucian hierarchy of relationships. There's a society where unconditional submission to various roles, ROLES, is of utmost importance. So it's easy to see why a totalitarian Marxist government will be at home here. Middle Eastern civilizations have been majorly influenced by Islam, and there's submission to rules, RULES, that is the all-important principle here, where there are requirements for virtually every aspect of life. And it's important to stress that these aren't good or bad. In fact, care for the poor, a main pillar of Islam, is obviously very commendable by any standard. Culture isn't just good or bad. It contains a whole raft of values. It's said that our own Western culture has now entered a stage dubbed as the therapeutic age, certainly since 2016, and the term expressive individualism is being used to describe where we're at today. It's a cocktail of moral relativism, postmodernism, where absolutes and binary are certainly well gone by now. It's mixed with a Marxist-based critical theory where the world's divided into oppressors and oppressed, and having an absolutely huge influence on our education system today, for example, with cancel culture and so on. The final component is a type of Gnostic thought that says we need to discover who we really are so that we can be our true, authentic selves. Examples will be seen in many of the Disney movies. The kind of self-actualization now comes into everyday life. So obviously understanding other worldviews not only helps us understand and relate cross-culturally, but it helps us understand the downsides and upsides of our own culture as we try and look objectively from the outside. But ultimately, though, we want to evaluate culture through the lens of Jesus's worldview. And to do that, it's helpful at this point to briefly look at how the biblical imagery and narrative develops in the way. The narrative generally depicts the emergence of civilizations, particularly as it increasingly revolves around key cities, as being quite a mixed bag. There's the oppressive King Lamech and other rulers of Babylonian-like cities, yet there's music and metalwork that's developing alongside the arts there too. A positive example, say, of institutional goodness is where an Egyptian pharaoh worked with Joseph to save a whole region from starvation. But often, as the narrative develops, the darker side of oppressive civilizations are described in terms of monster-like creatures. Daniel being a classic example, the imagery is of horrible beasts coming out of the sea, trying to drag the world back into apocalyptical chaos. We're all aware of biblical imagery of the snake and other wild animals that are somehow cooperating with these dark spiritual forces, right from the snake in the Garden of Eden and the crouching wild-like animal that Cain is warned not to give into. He does, of course, and the ensuing murder and personal failure starts a downward spiral, leading to cities and civilizations becoming places of oppression with slavery and even ritual child sacrifice. Again, Old Testament prophets often refer to these civilizations with beast-like imagery. They're generally called the Tannim and Leviathan in Hebrew, and in the New Testament as Drakon in the Greek. And they're depicted as trying to drag the world back into chaos towards a state of decreation and death. This isn't to say that these wild animals mentioned in the Bible are inherently evil. The sea monsters are pronounced as good in Genesis 1, albeit I'm not sure that this giant pliosaur found recently on the Dorset coast could have ever been tamed. In contrast though, XL bully dogs can be domesticated and kept as pets, but they can on a bad day kill. It's important to note then that non-order is not bad as such, but it's from this that God brings about order. John Walton says, sin is about being dragged into a place of disorder. Leviathan and Behemoth in Job aren't necessarily evil, but by the time we get to Revelation, they are agents of the Drakon, the dragon. However, it's the spiritual dynamic that's of particular importance to us here. Jesus and the New Testament writings have a whole raft of references to these dark spiritual powers. Peter mentions a devouring lion in 1 Peter 5, and there's the whole apocalyptical narrative in John's Revelations. Paul particularly refers to these powers as strongholds, lofty ideas, authorities and dominions with institutional evil power, etc. In 2 Corinthians 10, Ephesians 6, these all refer to forces that need to be battled with, both in the spiritual realms as well as in everyday life. But it's on the cross that Jesus disarmed these beast-like monsters of chaos, along with their claim of holding ultimate power and authority, Colossians 2:15. But we've still got quite a job on our hands to overcome, and certainly not to be intimidated by these powers whose ultimate weapon is to wield the fear of death. Revelations 12:11 gives us some hints how we can be overcomers. So we celebrate the one whose sacrificial love and blood brings us out of darkness and institutional chaos into the kingdom of light, where we look forward to the God of peace, who will soon crush Satan under our feet, so the kingdom of God will be finally able to come in its entirety. So the question that this poses for us here and now is how we should be engaging with these monster-like powers to be in the world, but not of the world, especially with the rising generation in mind who have been reared on expressive individualism, where you can get cancelled for saying otherwise. We're so wanting to see the kingdom of come in power in this generation. We want to discuss the next question in our breakout groups. How can we practically step up in our discipleship making, especially in our churches, so that we can develop front-footed overcomers, both at a personal level and also at institutional levels? Thank you.
feature film. That is. Great. Well.